Hello, today I'm going to talk about mulch. I'm Liz Zorab and this is Byther Farm. You hear gardeners talk about mulch, and particularly organic gardeners who tend to go on and on about using mulch, and there's a really good reason for it. So what is mulch? It is a layer that you put over the surface of the soil. And there are several really good reasons for doing that. First of all, a layer that excludes the light will reduce the amount of weeding that needs to be done, because without the light, a lot of weed seeds won't germinate. The second and really useful thing it does is it locks moisture down into the soil. So if you put a mulch layer onto damp soil, so if you've watered the soil or it's been raining, and you put a layer of mulch, just a couple of inches will do, that will hold that moisture down into the soil, make it available for the plants to use, and reduce the amount of evaporation due to that glorious sunshine. And the other thing, which is possibly the most important, is when you use an organic matter on the ground, whether it's wood chips or homemade compost, straw, hay, newspaper, there's a whole load of different things that you can use as a mulch. These things will all return nutrients to the soil, and because worms do what worms do, they will come up from the soil and they will take your mulch layer down and incorporate it and mix it into the soil, and it will improve the soil. It will improve the soil structure, and it can improve the soil's microbiology, so the living organisms within the soil. In this bed I've used homemade compost. So this is lovely stuff. This has been made over the last couple of years through a cold composting method, and it's around this comfrey plant and all these young flowers that I've put in. I know there are tons of worms in this bed, so they'll be coming up to take this mulch down over the next year or so. But in the meantime, it will reduce the weeds, it'll keep the moisture in, and you can see I've watered in the last day or so, and the soil is staying together. Because it's moist enough. There we go. This soil has had very little mulch on it, and you can see it's been baked hard by the sun. The soil is like, well, it's just like dust. So this really needs next time it rains, and so that this has actually got some moisture in it, I need to bring more mulch over and lock that moisture into the ground and add in those nutrients, and the mulch will also help to suppress some of this weed growth as well. There's a whole host of materials that can be used as mulches. One of my favourites is wood chips, and these will break down over time and be highly water retentive. We had a heavy rainstorm about 10 days ago, but none since then. So the top surface is really dry, and this is actually on some paper sacks because I'm trying to exclude the light from any weeds. But underneath the paper sacks, the soil is it is still really moist. It's holding together. It's doing a really good job. So wood chips on top of paper sacks do an amazing job of mulch, and over time this will break down and it will add the organic matter to the soil. Another mulch that I like to use is grass clippings. So these came from my neighbours. They don't put anything on their grass, they just cut it and bring it round for us. So you can see it's really dried out on the top, and underneath it still looks a little green. And Erica from Erica's Little Welsh Garden and I were talking about this. What an amazing job grass clippings do for keeping the ground moist. And there you can see how dark that soil is, where the moisture is retained in it. Let's tuck that back up. So I use this as a mulch around my potatoes, and the next lot will then get put that much higher up around the potatoes to exclude the light from the stems. And when I lift the potatoes, I just put my hand in and find the potatoes and leave as much of the mulch on the ground as possible. And then over the winter that will all break down. It will add its nutrients to the soil, and bit by bit we are improving the soil structure all the time. The other thing that I have access to an awful lot of is used chicken bedding. Now this is very strong, it's very high in alkalinity, so it needs to sit in a heap and rest for at least 12 to 18 months, if not longer. So that it doesn't actually burn the plants that you are growing around it or in it. But once it's rested and it's started breaking down, it's also really good. It's really high in nitrogen, and again the soil underneath it is very moist, and this poor little plant needs a water, but it's very good at retaining the moisture, and as long as I actually remember to water the plants when I first put them in, this mulch will help lock that moisture down for the plants. I also use weed suppressing membrane as a mulch, and here is literally just to suppress the weeds. I'm just clearing this area of weeds. It's had a lot of grass, it's got a lot of stinging nettles and a lot of dock leaves, so the mulch is down for this season. And in the winter I will cover, I'll take the plastic up, and then I'll cover this area in organic matter and allow that to work itself into the soil for the winter, and then this area will be lovely for growing in next year. But in the meantime I've made some small holes in the membrane, and I've planted in some squashes. You can see they're drooping in the heat. It is just incredibly hot at the moment. So they've had a water in. I'm trying to restrict it to once or maybe twice a week, and then I'm giving each plant a good bucket load of water, so that the soil all around it gets a really good drink as well, and then leave it. Because what I want the plants to do is to put their roots down really deep and access water at lower levels, rather than if you water it little and often, the roots will stay near the surface where the water is, and then you'll need to keep on watering them. Whereas if they get their roots deeper down to the lower levels where the water is more likely to be, well, you're just going to have a stronger, healthier plant. Around the plants I've put some grit, and this is mainly because I've cut a hole in the weed suppressing membrane. I'm using the grit to hold the loose pieces down so they don't flap around in the wind, but it will also help suppress the weed growth where the opening is, because anywhere that the light can get in, the weeds will come up through. So just a little bit of grit. This is actually poultry grit, but it is what I had to hand, so that's what I've used. So a little bit of shells and flint in it, but it's just as a weight, it's holding it down. Now that's not going to add any nutrients to the soil, but it's a very clay soil. So next year, when this is actually on the soil rather than on the membrane, This will help open up that very clay soil a little bit. This bed has 2 different mulches on it. This one is duck bedding, and unlike chicken bedding, this is mild enough to be able to put straight onto the beds. So you can just put it on and it will be fine. And the other thing I've got, which just went on this morning, is pondweed. One of my neighbours has got quite a big pond, but they've got this weed in it, and I would consider this an invasive weed. I wouldn't want it in my pond. My ducks love to eat it, so if I do put it anywhere near the duck pond, they eat it immediately. I've tried several times growing it for them in the pond, but they've just eaten it all. However, the neighbour very kindly lets us have huge quantities of this, which high in nutrients, high in nitrogen, breaks down quite quickly, and mixed with the straw from the duck bedding very quickly forms a really nice compost. And in the meantime, it's great for excluding the light from around the potato plants. Inside the Brassica tunnel here, I really need to get some mulch on the ground. It's very, very dry, and there's weeds springing up everywhere. There's also lots of plants that I wouldn't mind keeping, so there's an awful lot of tomato plants have sprung up. And when I was trying to think about what to do in here, I saw a post on social media from a woman called Katie Shepherd, who teaches permaculture, and she was showing a pile of seeds that she was going to be using on the ground as a mulch. So I'm going to do the same thing in the Brassica tunnel here. So I'm going to chop and drop the weeds. So I will literally chop them off, drop them on the ground. As long as they haven't gone to seed, they can break down in situ and return their nutrients to the soil. And then I'm going to scatter a lot of seeds and create a living mulch. So the plants will grow up, there'll be edibles, and there'll be flowers for pollinators. And they'll form a thick layer underneath these brassicas. And these are tall brassicas. There's Cavallonero kale, Brussels sprouts, and purple sprouting broccoli. The ones on the outer edges are cabbages, which will come out in a few months' time. And that will leave a complete area of growing, living mulch, most of which will be edible. And it's like a form of extreme interplanting. I'm really excited to get going with this. Well, that's it for me today. I'm going to get on with shifting some of these wood chips. These ones are going down onto the path, and they will break down for a couple of years before I add them to the beds as a mulch on the beds. And so, wherever you are in the world and whatever you've got planned for today, I hope it's a good one, and I also hope you'll join me again next time.